5 of my own teammates tried to force me out, and even my manager backed them. They said I was the weak link holding them back, until I pulled out one thing from my bag that shut every single one of them up on the spot. I was already sweating before I even walked into the tiny windowless conference room on the 3rd floor of the Carter Building in downtown Milwaukee. But the moment I stepped inside, the air changed. 5 of my own team members were waiting for me, waiting like they had rehearsed this. They'd pushed the chairs into a half-circle facing the door. I was expected to walk in and sit in the lone empty chair in the center. A trap. A damn trap. "Sit, Rowan," said Tessa, our operations lead, her voice falsely sweet. Her red blazer looked like armor, and she angled her chin at me like she'd already won. I didn't sit. Not yet. Marcus, Dylan, Priya, and Gwen watched me with the same cold look people wear when they've already made up their minds about you. And near the wall, arms crossed, face unreadable, stood our division manager, Harrison Cole, the man who had recommended me for this position 6 months ago, the man I'd trusted. "What is this?" I asked, scanning their faces. None of them looked nervous. They looked hungry. "We're addressing your performance issues," Marcus said. He brought out a thick folder. "We've documented everything." Tessa slid the stack toward me like she was dealing a final hand of cards. Missed deadlines, client frustrations, inconsistent workflows, productivity drops, all linked directly to your decisions since you arrived. I laughed. Couldn't help it. "You're kidding me. You all know damn well this division was a disaster before I even—" "Funny," Priya cut in, "because everything ran smoothly under our previous director. Then you showed up and suddenly everything's falling apart." My stomach twisted. They were rewriting history right in front of me. And Harrison, the man who'd promised me support, transparency, a real chance to rebuild this broken unit, didn't say a word. No one questioned the obvious. The mess had existed long before me. No one acknowledged the sabotage I'd quietly suspected. Harrison finally stepped forward. "Rowan," he said with a tone that was way too calm for what was happening. "The executive team wants decisive action. I've already discussed transition options with HR." "Transition? Jesus. You want me to step down?" I said, voice low. "For the good of the team," Tessa said, leaning back with a satisfied smile. They really thought this was checkmate. I stared at the stack of fabricated evidence. My hands shook. Not from fear, but from fury. 6 months of cleaning their chaos. 6 months of fixing processes they'd deliberately broken. 6 months of realizing that every time I made progress, something mysteriously collapsed again. Now it all made sense. This wasn't incompetence. This was a coordinated attack. "You guys have been busy," I said. "And thorough," Dylan added smugly. Harrison moved closer. "We need your decision today. A managed exit or a lateral move. But you're not staying in this position." They all stared at me like vultures waiting for a body to stop twitching. But I wasn't the one circling death in that room. I reached into my bag slowly, deliberately. Every set of eyes tracked my hand. I felt their confidence waver just an inch. "Before I give you an answer," I said calmly, "there's something you all should know." I set a small black device on the table. Not a flash drive. Not a folder. Something worse. Something none of them expected. Harrison's face changed first. A flicker of real fear. "What is that?" he asked. I smiled. For the first time all morning. "Proof," I said quietly. "The kind that burns careers to ash." Their expressions shifted at once. Surprise, confusion, doubt, panic. And then I added, "And I'm not the only one who knows it exists." The room erupted with overlapping voices. Accusations, questions, fear. Harrison stepped forward, face tight. "Rowan, what did you do?" I looked at him dead in the eyes. "You should be asking what you did." When people hear corporate betrayal, they assume exaggeration. They picture mild office politics or passive-aggressive emails. They don't picture what was really happening inside the Strategic Initiatives Division at Halberd and Marsh in Milwaukee. An entire unit rotting from the inside, held together by duct tape, denial, and a group of employees who acted more like a territorial street gang than professionals. I landed in the middle of it 6 months before that ambush. My name is Rowan Hale, and I should have known something was off from day one. I was recruited hard. Harrison Cole called me personally, said he'd followed my work at 2 previous firms, said I was exactly what the division needed. "We've had instability," he admitted in the interview. "We need someone strong. Someone who isn't afraid to rebuild." Rebuild. That was the word. Only later did I realize rebuild really meant walk into a war zone without armor. My first week, every single project file was a mess. Different formats, missing budgets, timelines that made no mathematical sense. At least 4 clients were already irritated, though somehow none of their complaints ever made it into the official metrics. When I asked for historical data, Gwen smiled like she was comforting a child and said, "Oh, we don't usually keep records longer than a quarter." That was a lie. A sloppy, stupid lie. The more I dug, the more I realized the whole division functioned on oral tradition. Nothing written down, nothing traceable, everyone hoarding knowledge like it gave them power. And it did. Because whoever controlled information controlled perception. And whoever controlled perception controlled promotions. I started making gentle changes first. Documentation templates, deadline maps, cross-functional logs, basic stuff. Stuff any normal team would roll with. That's when the pushback started. Small at first. A missing spreadsheet here. A client call rescheduled without my knowledge. A report accidentally overwritten. Emails that mysteriously never reached me. Every time I confronted someone, they blamed miscommunication, or the system, or IT, or the weather, or my newness. They always smiled, always apologetic, always rehearsed. Then I started noticing something else. Every time I tried to establish a new process, Harrison pulled me aside privately. "Maybe don't change that yet, Rowan. Let the team handle it their way for now. You're coming in too strong. Slow down." But then, during leadership check-ins, he'd say the opposite. "Push harder. Take ownership. Don't let them walk over you." Mixed messages. Contradictions. A setup disguised as guidance. The turning point came 2 months in when a major client, Marlowe Ventures, called me directly. They wanted to know why they hadn't seen a progress update in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I dug into the files and found the project practically untouched. Dylan had marked everything on track in our internal system, but the timestamps didn't match. Someone had edited the entries after the fact. When I confronted him, he smirked. Actually smirked. "Maybe you shouldn't micromanage. Trust the process, Rowan." My stomach sank that day. All of them, Tessa, Marcus, Priya, Gwen, Dylan, they weren't dysfunctional. They were coordinated. A single unit. A blockade. And I was the outsider they decided wasn't allowed in. But here's the part one never told anyone. I considered leaving. 3 separate nights, I drafted a resignation email. I stared at it. I saved it. I deleted it. I didn't leave for one reason. One that mattered more than fear or exhaustion or humiliation. Because right before I hit send the last time, something happened. Something that made it impossible to walk away. Something that showed me the truth about my team and about Harrison. Something I haven't told you yet. And that thing? Let's just say it made everything that followed necessary. Deadly necessary. That night, the one where I almost quit, I stayed late to finish a proposal draft. The office was mostly dark except for the exit signs and the flickering fluorescent lights that always made the 3rd floor feel like a hospital hallway. Around 9:45 p.m., I heard voices. Not casual conversation. Not work talk. Tense, low, deliberate voices. Coming from the break room at the far end of the hall. At first, I thought maybe janitorial staff had come early. But the voices were familiar. Too familiar. I moved closer, quietly. Not to eavesdrop, just to say I was heading out. But then I heard my name. Not once. Not twice. Repeatedly. "Rowan won't last another quarter," someone said. That was Marcus. "She doesn't get how things work here," Priya added. "She keeps asking too many questions." My chest tightened. I didn't breathe. Then Tessa spoke. And her voice, God, I'll never forget the way she said it. We need her gone before the new fiscal cycle. Harrison is on board, he just needs evidence. Harrison, my so-called mentor, my supposed advocate. Dylan chimed in. We've already got the report started. Productivity metrics will be easy. She's been changing everything, so any dip can be pinned on her. Then Gwen said something that made my blood run cold. The Marlowe account will fail. Delays are already in place. When it collapses, we drop the file in her lap. It'll look negligent. My heartbeat was so loud in my ears I almost didn't hear the next part. Almost. HR won't question it, Tessa added. They trust us more than some outsider. She'll take the fall. Then we can go back to doing things right. I felt the walls tilt. Outsider. Fall. Evidence. I froze, completely still, listening as they calmly discussed dismantling my career like it was a housekeeping chore. Then Harrison walked in. I recognized his stride before I saw him. Confident, heavy, purposeful. How's the documentation coming? He asked. Marcus replied instantly. Almost done. We're collecting every instance of misalignment. And the Marlowe account? Harrison asked. Silence. The kind that means guilt. Then Dylan. It's on track to implode next month. Good, Harrison said. That'll make this clean. When the executives see she can't manage a flagship client, the rest of the report will confirm the pattern. They'll fast-track her out. My stomach dropped. My hands shook. I pressed my back to the wall so hard my shoulders hurt. Harrison continued. Keep everything off email. No paper trails. And don't get sloppy. We only get one shot at this. Tessa whispered. What if she figures out what we're doing? Harrison chuckled. Actually chuckled. She won't. Rowan's too busy trying to fix the mess she thinks she inherited. She doesn't realize we're the ones who decide what this division looks like. Something inside me snapped at those words. Something small and final. Because I realized then, it wasn't sabotage born from incompetence or laziness. It was strategy. They weren't failing accidentally. They were failing for a purpose. And I was the collateral damage. When I slipped away from that hallway, I knew two things with absolute clarity. 1. They weren't just trying to push me out. They were orchestrating my destruction. 2. If I didn't find a way to expose them, they would bury me alive and smile while doing it. I went home shaking. I didn't sleep. I spent the whole night hunched over my laptop, staring at everything I'd gathered so far. Patterns, anomalies, data mismatches, mysterious errors tied to the same 5 people. And then I found something I hadn't noticed before. Something that didn't just confirm their sabotage, it revealed something way bigger. Something that made what they were doing look almost mild by comparison. Because they weren't the only ones manipulating this division. Someone else, someone above them, had been pulling strings long before I ever walked through those doors. And that realization changed everything. I didn't plan on finding it. I was digging through archived billing data at 3 a.m., half delirious from fear and adrenaline, when I stumbled across something that didn't belong. An encrypted folder buried inside a backup drive that hadn't been touched in almost 4 years. The folder name was nothing special. Archive_7B. Generic. Innocent. Practically invisible. But the timestamp caught my eye. It had been last accessed on a night where, according to company records, the entire building had supposedly been closed for electrical maintenance. Someone had been here. Someone had used the system when no one else was supposed to. Against every instinct screaming at me to stop poking around, I opened it. Inside were spreadsheets, hundreds of them, old client records, performance metrics, employee reports, all tied to the years before I joined, years when the division had supposedly been stable, successful, running smoothly. Except none of it matched. Not the numbers, not the timelines, not the budgets. It was all manipulated, all falsified, all manufactured to create the illusion of stability. And every single document traced back to the same username, H. Cole, Harrison, my mentor, my advocate, my support. He had been altering division metrics for years. And the worst part? My team, the ones plotting my downfall, weren't even the masterminds. They were pawns. Useful pawns. Loyal pawns. But pawns all the same. Because once I decrypted a few more files and pieced together the data, the truth slammed into me so hard I felt physically nauseous. Harrison had orchestrated the previous director's downfall too. And the one before that. And the one before that. Every failed leader. Every poorly performing cycle. Every necessary leadership change. All engineered. Not by accident. Not by incompetence. Not by a dysfunctional team. But by Harrison Cole himself. The man had created a system where only he looked like the savior. Where every new director failed spectacularly. Where he swooped in as the temporary stabilizer and regained control, reinforced loyalty, strengthened his power. He created chaos so he could control the cleanup. He built dysfunction so he could stay essential. And when the chaos wasn't enough, he nudged things, shifted numbers, quietly sabotaged projects, rewrote histories. He didn't want the division fixed. He wanted it dependent. My heart pounded as the truth unfurled. My team hadn't just turned on me because they were petty or scared or territorial. They had been groomed, conditioned, manipulated into believing every outsider was the threat. Every new leader was the problem. Every failure was real. And Harrison? He played them like instruments. Each spreadsheet I opened felt like a punch to the ribs. Each altered metric a dagger. But then came the real betrayal. The one that shattered whatever naive trust one had left. Hidden in the final encrypted folder was a document labeled Succession_plan_REV. Final draft. When I opened it, I saw my name. Not under future leadership, but under project removal. A timeline of my supposed failures, most of which hadn't even happened yet. Pre-written, predated, pre-scripted. They had drafted my exit plan before I ever started the job. Down to the month I was supposed to break. Down to which client failure would be blamed on me. Down to the conflicts they would discover among the team. Harrison had planned my downfall before I even shook his hand. My team was just fulfilling a role they'd been trained to play. I sat there in my living room, the glow of my laptop the only light, and realized I was living inside a rigged system designed to chew people like me up and spit us out. But I wasn't going to be the next casualty. Not after what I'd just uncovered. Not after learning the truth behind their smiles, their ambush, their dossier. And definitely not after discovering what Harrison had already done to the director before me. Something I would soon learn was even darker than financial manipulation. Something that would turn this entire situation from sabotage into something far more sinister. The morning after I uncovered Harrison's forged timelines and pre-planned exit script, something inside me clicked off. Not snapped. Not broke. Switched off. Like a fuse protecting something deeper. Fear? Gone. Shock? Burned out. All that remained was a clean, cold sense of purpose. They had mapped out my destruction down to the damn month. They had built a machine designed to grind outsiders into dust. And I was supposed to just lie down and let it happen? No, absolutely not. If they wanted a quiet casualty, they picked the wrong woman. I shut my laptop and stared at the wall for a full minute, letting the weight of the decision settle over me. There would be no sensible resignation, no lateral move, no clean HR exit. I was going to expose every single one of them, but not loudly, not recklessly, and definitely not without precision. If Harrison had spent years constructing this little kingdom of controlled chaos, then I needed to dismantle it brick by brick. Starting with the 5 employees who believed he was some kind of benevolent dictator. Step 1. Collect everything. Anything digital could be deleted or rewritten. They'd done it before. They'd do it again. So I needed redundancies. External drives. Secure cloud storage not tied to my company account. Encrypted duplicates. Hidden backups. I spent 6 hours building a system that would survive even if Harrison tried to wipe the entire division server. Step 2. Document patterns. Not just sabotage, collusion. 5 people rewriting deadlines the same nights. 5 people accessing client files minutes apart. 5 people submitting nearly identical complaints about past directors. That consistency, that was gold. Patterns prove intent. Step 3. Build a counter-narrative. If they planned to blame me for the Marlowe account collapse, I needed to show exactly how they orchestrated that collapse. I collected timestamp logs, Slack messages, calendar changes, every accidental delay, every suspicious file edit. Every breadcrumb pointed straight to them. Step 4. Turn their own strategy against them. They believed information was control. So I decided to control the information. Started small. A conversation with IT about system inconsistencies. A casual check-in with compliance about unusual reporting discrepancies. A quiet request to HR for documentation protocols to ensure accuracy moving forward. Nothing alarming. Nothing observable. Nothing they could trace back to me. But each conversation planted a seed. And each seed pointed suspicion upward, toward Harrison. Step 5. Find the missing piece. Because something still didn't fit. The encrypted folders, the manipulated metrics, the way he'd groomed the team, it was all calculated, yes. But why had he gone so far? Why ruin 5 directors? Why rewrite entire years of division performance? Why risk his entire career? No one does this level of strategic destruction just to feel needed. There was something else at play. Something I hadn't uncovered yet. But I knew exactly where to find it. The key was the director before me. The one Harrison had supposedly supported until he chose to resign. Except the data told a different story. And my gut told an even worse one. So I went hunting for everything related to him, old emails, archived reports, HR logs, Slack backups. And around midnight, in a forgotten HR folder mislabeled with the wrong year, I found the first hint. Not proof. Not yet. Just a single document. But the second I opened it, my blood went cold. Because it revealed something I had never even considered. Something that changed the tone of everything I'd found so far. Something that made Harrison's controlling behavior look less like power hoarding. And more like desperation. A secret. A threat. Something big enough to make a man destroy careers to keep it buried. And if my instincts were right, this secret wasn't just the motive. It was the weapon. Against me. Against the past directors. Against anyone who got too close to the truth. I stared at the document, pulse hammering, and whispered to myself, "Holy shit, this is worse than I thought." But it wasn't fear anymore. It was strategy. Because now I finally knew I didn't just have evidence. I had leverage. And Harrison had no idea I'd found it. The file I found, misfiled, mislabeled, practically buried under years of digital dust, was only 2 pages long. 2 pages that flipped the entire story upside down. It was a formal concern report, drafted by the previous director, a man named Evan Mercer. I'd barely known his name before this. He'd only lasted 9 months in the role before he resigned for personal reasons. Personal reasons. What a joke. Evan had submitted the report 3 weeks before he vanished from the company. According to the timestamp, it was never acknowledged, never escalated, never logged in the system. That alone was suspicious. The report detailed something I'd never even imagined. Suspected unapproved vendor relationship, possible kickback scheme. Kickbacks. At my company, at this dysfunctional, territorial, petty division, the report centered around a third-party vendor named Northbridge Analytics. I'd heard the name a few times in old financial summaries, but I didn't think much of it. We hadn't used them during my tenure. According to Evan, Northbridge had been billing the company for consulting audits that no one requested, no one scheduled, and no one could produce deliverables for. Tens of thousands of dollars at a time. Each invoice signed off by Harrison Cole. My breath caught in my throat. It got worse. The report mentioned a pattern. Whenever a director started questioning budgets or vendor relationships, Northbridge invoices spiked, and then the director was removed for performance issues. Evan ended his report with one final line. "I believe Harrison is using fabricated audits to siphon department funds and eliminate oversight." I felt the floor drop under me. Holy fucking hell. This wasn't territorialism. This wasn't fear of change. This wasn't even Harrison wanting to control the division. This was fraud. Organized, strategic, multi-year fraud. Harrison used the division as his personal piggy bank, and my team, my loyal in-house gang, they weren't just brainwashed followers. They were part of the cover. Some knowingly, some unknowingly, but all complicit in sustaining a system that protected Harrison and buried anyone who got too close. My stomach twisted as the full picture came into focus. Evan tried to expose him. Evan disappeared. And now they were doing the same thing to me. But then I saw the second page. One I almost missed because I was shaking so hard. A draft email Evan had written but never sent. Addressed to Harrison. Just one sentence. If anything happens to me or my career, I've already placed a copy of the evidence with someone I trust. I stopped breathing. Someone he trusted. Someone still out there. Someone who might still have whatever proof Evan gathered before Harrison forced him out. Someone who could help me. I reread that sentence over and over, heart beating like a fist against my ribs. There was more. At the bottom of the page was a handwritten note, likely added by an HR clerk who tried to categorize the file before it vanished into digital purgatory. Employee file also includes emergency contact. L. Mercer, Madison, Wisconsin. Evan had a sibling, close enough to trust with evidence, close enough to know what he was afraid of, close enough to know why he ran, or what forced him out. My mind raced. If that sibling still had the evidence Evan collected, then Harrison's entire operation could collapse in a day. Not just sabotage, not just personnel manipulation, criminal charges, financial audits, federal investigation. This was the missing piece. This was the reason Harrison orchestrated chaos. This was why he needed the team loyal and outsiders gone. This was why he pre-planned my exit. He couldn't risk another director discovering what Evan found. But now, I had the thread. I had Evan's warning. And I had a name. L. Mercer. Madison. One person who could confirm everything. One person Harrison had no idea I was about to find. I closed my laptop, grabbed my keys, and whispered to myself, time to finish what Evan started. I didn't drive to Madison right away. Not because I didn't want answers, God, I wanted them more than sleep, more than food, more than breathing. But because I knew walking into this blind would get me killed professionally, maybe literally. Harrison had been gaming this system for years. Whatever drove him to orchestrate fraud and groom loyal foot soldiers wasn't something mild or accidental. People don't rewrite entire divisions unless the reason is dark. People don't destroy 5 directors unless the reason is terrifying. People don't plan your downfall before you even start unless the reason is personal. And Harrison's reason? It wasn't about leadership. It wasn't about being passed up for a promotion. It wasn't even about ego. It was about control of money, and a secret he was willing to ruin anyone to protect. Before I met with Evan's sister, I went back into the system one more time. I needed to gather every shred of evidence before confronting anyone who might be in danger because of this. I dug deeper into Northbridge Analytics, and the deeper I dug, the sicker I felt. The vendor wasn't a real company. No website, no employees on LinkedIn, no corporate filings, no tax IDs tied to the invoices. The address listed on every invoice? A P.O. box registered to a shell corporation in Harrison's mother's maiden name. It wasn't subcontracting. It wasn't consulting. It was a pipeline, a siphon, a funnel. Harrison had created a fake vendor, forged audits, and billed the company for services that never existed. And every time a director tried to fix the division or dig into finances, he destroyed them. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I found next. Buried in an old accounting backup system they must have forgotten to scrub. Payments from the company to Northbridge totaled nearly $1.9 million over 6 years. And where did those funds end up? Transferred into a second entity with an owner listed as H. Cole. Apparently Harrison wasn't just trying to protect his career. He was trying to protect a criminal operation he'd been running right under corporate leadership's nose. He'd been draining the division dry. That was his motive. That was why my team was trained to hate outsiders. That was why every new director failed. That was why processes were intentionally chaotic. That was why no documentation existed. Order would expose him. Chaos kept him alive. He didn't want control of the division because he loved it. He wanted control because he needed a shield, loyal employees who would never question him, a team dependent on his guidance, a system so dysfunctional no one could find the real rot. He built a kingdom of confusion so he could keep stealing. And then I found the final piece. The reason he wasn't just hiding fraud. He was hiding a blackmail trail. In the HR vault, one level deeper, I found an old discipline report about an employee I'd never heard of. Someone who had worked under Harrison years before the revolving door of directors began. That employee had discovered irregularities too. Filed a complaint. Escalated it outside the division. Weeks later, she was terminated for conduct violations. Her file had been rewritten. Her name erased from organizational history. Her severance agreement sealed. Her reputation destroyed so thoroughly she never worked in the industry again. And then I saw it. The handwritten note in the corner of the archived PDF. Likely missed during their cover-up because someone scanned it in a rush. Handled. Won't happen again. HC handled. Won't happen again. My stomach twisted into something cold and metallic. Harrison wasn't sabotaging people out of fear, or pettiness, or ambition. He was eliminating threats. He was erasing anyone who came close. Directors, analysts, entire careers. He wasn't protecting a system. He was protecting himself. At any cost. And in that moment, with my laptop glowing in the dark and my heartbeat pounding like it was trying to escape my chest, I finally understood why he'd already written my exit script before I ever stepped into that building. I wasn't just another director. I was his next threat, and he was ready to destroy me. I met with Evan Mercer's sister, Lena, 2 days after uncovering the truth. She lived in a tiny walk-up above a nail salon in Madison. The kind of place you end up when a corporation guts your family and no one is left to pick up the pieces. She looked exhausted even before I explained why I came. When I mentioned her brother's name, her entire face collapsed. Evan told me someone else would come one day, she whispered. Someone who found what he found. My chest tightened. Evan had known. He'd known Harrison wouldn't let him walk away clean. I told her everything. The sabotage, the forged records, the fake vendor, the blackmail, the pre-written exit plan for me. Her eyes filled with rage. Not tears, rage. And she handed me a worn envelope from a shoebox under her bed. Inside were flash drives. 3 of them. Evan's real insurance. Full audits, audio recordings, screenshots, emails, and a video of him confronting Harrison in a parking garage late at night. Harrison denying everything. Harrison threatening him. Harrison saying the words, "You don't understand who you're dealing with." Chills ripped straight down my spine. This was it. The missing evidence Evan had died professionally, and nearly personally, to protect. I thanked Lena, promised I'd finish what her brother started, and meant every word. Revenge isn't fire. It's ice. Controlled. Sharp. Precise. And I was done playing defense. I didn't go to HR. I didn't go to Harrison. I didn't go to my team. I went straight to the board audit committee. Not the executives. Not the CEO Harrison was counting on to protect him. The board. The one entity Harrison could not manipulate. I scheduled a private early morning meeting under the guise of urgent compliance discrepancies. I walked into that conference room with 3 flash drives, 2 printed binders, and a level of calm I didn't know I was capable of. I began with the small stuff. Manipulated deadlines, falsified metrics, coordinated sabotage, intentional client mismanagement. They looked disturbed. Then I showed them the payment trail. The shell corporation. The P.O. box tied to Harrison's mother's maiden name. The $1.9 million. They looked stunned. Then I played the video. Harrison threatening Evan in the dark. The room went dead silent except for the sound of one board member's pen hitting the table. By the time I walked out, the investigation had already begun. That same afternoon, Harrison was escorted from the building. My team, Tessa, Marcus, Priya, Dylan, and Gwen, were pulled into individual compliance interviews that lasted hours. They were suspended pending outcome. By the end of the week, all 5 were terminated for coordinated misconduct, breach of policy, and aiding in the concealment of financial fraud. Harrison, he didn't just lose his job. He lost everything. The company filed formal charges. Authorities got involved. The shell corporations were traced. The stolen funds identified. The cover-ups exposed. Every director he'd destroyed, every employee he'd blacklisted, their names were cleared. And Evan Mercer, after 4 years of silence and shame, had his reputation restored publicly. I made sure of it. The board offered me the position of Executive Director of Strategic Initiatives, the same job Harrison always wanted but could never have. I didn't celebrate. Not really. Because winning didn't feel like triumph. It felt like surviving a house fire you didn't start. I rebuilt the division from the ground up using one rule Evan had written in the corner of his old files. No single person should control the truth. Not a bad philosophy. 6 months later, the division posted the strongest results in company history. When they asked how I pulled it off, I said, by removing the rot. And sometimes, revenge isn't about burning someone down. Sometimes it's about flipping on the lights and watching the cockroaches scatter.